Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments here in Israel, with chief focus, of course, on the Syrian front, as well as other theaters in the region, it's always important to remember how the war in the Middle East began. On October 7th of last year, 431 days ago, the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates in the Gaza Strip had launched a surprise onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping some 250 people, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 100 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. The subsequent day, on October 8th of last year, Iran essentially joined the war when it greenlighted its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, to launch cross-border attacks against Israel. Since then, Hezbollah launched over 13,000 munitions towards Israeli territory, and not Hezbollah alone. Additional Iranian proxies from Syria, from Iraq, from Yemen, including Iran proper, have all launched direct attacks against Israel. Nevertheless, in recent days, this whole situation altered with a tectonic shift when the Damascus regime collapsed within a matter of merely 12 days. To deliberate that and much more, let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren, with me here in the studio. Amir, set the stage for us. What are the key guiding principles for Israel when it comes to the Syrian theater as we speak right now?
So you are right. In recent days, this has become the main front for the Israeli Defense Forces. But let's not forget, and we shouldn't, that there is still military action in Gaza, in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, and in South Lebanon. And earlier this week, 7 Israeli soldiers lost their lives in Gaza and in South Lebanon. In Gaza, it was the result of Hamas action, and in South Lebanon, it was an operational accident when probably an Israeli explosive charge detonated, causing the death of 4 reservists. But if we turn our gaze towards Syria, nothing short of amazing is what has happened there. Not only what you alluded to regarding the rebels toppling the Assad regime, but what the IDF has been doing over the last 2 or 3 days, decimating the entire Air Force and Navy of Syria without much opposition, as far as we know, almost in an offhanded way. We have heard from, among other things, Defense Minister Israel Katz, when he visited the Haifa Naval Base, the main base of the Israeli Navy, that overnight the Israeli missile boat flotilla has destroyed the Syrian Navy, presumably out of Tartus and Latakia. But perhaps there are no longer Russian ships there. So there is no protection for the Syrian Navy. So in a sense, what took the Israeli Air Force a bold operation in 1967, and the Israeli Navy, similarly, a bold operation in 1973, happened as an offshoot of the Syrian revolt. And Israel does not brag about it because it wants to exploit the situation. And the result is that right now, of course, they can always reconstitute, but right now, Syria has ceased to be a military threat to Israel.
As Karl von Clausewitz, General Karl von Clausewitz, the famous military historian, said or wrote in his book, this is a classic case of fog of war. Joining us from Central Israel is Brigadier General in Reserve Amnon Sofrin, formerly the head of the Mossad's intelligence division, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. It's good to see you, General. The way Amir just characterized this ongoing operation. We still don't know the extent of it, but putting it in layman's terms, 350 aerial sorties targeting specifically all of the Assad regime's abandoned munitions, strategic capabilities, aerial capabilities, naval capabilities, wiping out basically, to a large extent, the entire Syrian military's capabilities within less than 72 hours, which is staggering by itself. Nevertheless, we do see this also accommodated and closely coordinated with the uh, AFCENT, American Air Force Central, which is also targeting over 75 targets of Islamic State in Syria, in accommodation, of course, to ensure and guarantee that no radical Islamist forces or jihadist forces will take any of the weaponry currently available in Syria. What should we take within this context, and how do the other countries involved in this current state of play looking at this?
First of all, Syria is getting into an era of instability due to the fact that there is no what we call a central entity that controls all the organizations. Each one has its own agenda, its own beliefs, its own aims. If you look, for example, what happens on the northern part of Syria, the rebels that are encouraged and sponsored in a way by Turkey are attacking now the Kurds in order to push them forward beyond the Euphrates River in the northern part of Syria, and to take hold on some areas within this complex. The second issue is there are disagreements between the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, who was the first or the main organization that led this rebel, and the people that came out from southern Syria, from the area of Dara, and the Druze that came out of Sweda, and each one of them has other thoughts and other disagreements. And to come to what we call a mutual equation that will enable to control Syria in a way, it seems to be complicated, and it will be solved within a day or two. They nominated a former prime minister to be what we call temporary prime minister, and he now notified that he's going to stay in this position until March 1st, 2025. That means for about 3 months. And within these 3 months, they have to get to some agreement, to some, maybe to legislate something, and to create some formation that will enable the country to be controlled. On the other hand, the IDF controlled or destroyed most of the what we call the strategic assets of the Assad armed forces, meaning aircrafts, naval vessels, and what we call the strategic capabilities, but they left all the tanks and APCs and so on because this is not going to be the big threat on Israel. And the idea was to deny the capabilities to fall down in the hands of these organizations, that who knows what are how they are going to exploit it vis-a-vis Israel.
Very interesting indeed. Mr. Oren, a number of countries are involved in the current state of play. Of course, Russia's out to a large extent due to its own miscalculation, so to speak. The Iranians are infuriated. We are hearing that the RGC is really taking stock of what just happened, in which its strategy, its grand strategy devised by Qasem Soleimani, has crumbled in front of their eyes, and they don't even realize how they can salvage not only their so-called axis of resistance, it's an axis of evil, of course, but they're also looking at it from a perspective of, okay, what is our next step? And how are we to maneuver in a very hostile environment, which, of course, erupted out of their own device?
So if you look at it in a historical perspective, they lost within a decade and a half Imad Murnia, Qasem Soleimani, Hassan Nasrallah, and the entire leadership of Hezbollah. And now they lost Assad and his regime. So who are going to come out of it positively? Turkey and Israel right now. Maybe Daesh too. This is quite a concern. So we saw Secretary of State Tony Blinken calling, among all of his colleagues, Hakan Fidan, the Turkish foreign minister, in order to make sure that while the Turks bolster their position in Syria along the lines that Dr. Sofrin just expounded, they will not hurt the Druze. As for the Kurds, remains to be seen. And the American interest, as explained by Blinken, is that Syria not be fragmented into various entities, that there will be, of course, they want rule of law, the Americans, democracy, and all of that. But the main thing is a central government, an address for the world, hopefully not the way the Assad family ruled, even though in the Middle East you cannot really promise that. And again, not to let Daesh, ISIS, or ISIL flourish again, because there are already rumblings coming out of Daesh. Also, they have a lot of prisoners who may get out of jail, almost the same way that the political prisoners managed to be released by the rebels. So the work is not done. As the Pentagon announced, at least 75 strikes against Daesh were conducted by CENTCOM. It means that the Israeli Air Force and the CENTAF, the Central Command Air Force, must deconflict, must coordinate their sorties. A lot of work yet to be done.
Utilizing F-15s, A-10s, the B-52s were
Well,
operational.
A-10s are really just for close air support for the various bases guarding mostly energy facilities. The Americans are there guarding gas and especially oil facilities so that they will not be taken over or retaken over by ISIS and will remain there for revenue in order for the economy.
Well, they're very sturdy aircraft, of course, capable of utilizing
Unless you have
close combat.
ground-to-air.
Indeed. Well, General Sofrin, let's talk about this Daesh issue. Since when we're talking about the Islamic State, namely Daesh, Dawlat Islam bil Iraq wa Ard al-Sham, we have, of course, Al-Qaeda, and now we're dealing with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, whose own militiamen, jihadists, self-declared, have all fought either for Al-Qaeda or for Daesh at some point in their career. Their leader was the number 2 of Al-Qaeda under Ayman Zawahiri. Prior to that, he was the number 2 under Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi at some point, sitting in prison, of course, in Iraq for his involvement with Al-Qaeda Iraq. And we're talking here about a long list of activities that he perpetrated together with many of his terrorists over the years, having both American blood on his hands as well as other Western blood, which needs to be taken into account. Now, this same al-Julani, or Abu Muhammad al-Julani, comes out and tells the West, no, I am now a leader of a faction that is not looking for the same outcome as Al-Qaeda and Daesh. Rather, we might have the same ideology, but our focus is on leading Damascus and the country of Syria. Are people taking him serious when we're talking about those deceptive messaging that he is putting out towards the West?
I don't know how people are looking at him, but I can assure you one thing. First of all, he's a terrorist. His background is, as you said before, he fought in Iraq under the control of Zarqawi, and then he came back to Syria. He established the Jabhat al-Nusra, who was affiliated to Al-Qaeda. Then he turned to be something else. He turned to be Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. We joined with many others and so on. And now he's showing his face, his smiling face and the moderate face to the Western countries, telling them that he doesn't aim to be what we call a terrorist. He's a very honest man. He wants only for good of Syria. He got rid of the tyrant of Mr. Bashar al-Assad, and now he's only wants for the best of Syria, and that's what he aims for. And he's smiling and showing that he's moderate. He doesn't take full control on Syria immediately. He wisely didn't demolish all what they call the symbols of Bashar al-Assad regime, meaning the palace and the parliament house and anything else, which could have been done otherwise if he didn't control that. And that means that he's trying to show off that he can be a leader, that he's a legitimate man, and he's chosen by the people, even though he wasn't chosen by anyone, except for maybe his own people. But nevertheless, he wants to control Syria on the coming months, after this period of time of 3 months, to establish some legislation, some frame that will enable them to control Syria in another way, to create another kind of regime, not the presidential one with the tyrant one, but kind of more, let's say, open-minded and more Western kind of. And that's what he's aiming for, and therefore he's trying to show face to moderate face and smiling faces to the Western countries. And I believe that since there's nobody else, in the end they will try to negotiate with him, and since there's nobody else, so this is the only person probably.
Yeah, well,
if I just may add, there are two types of revolutionaries. You have the Jomo Kenyatas and the Fidel Castros. The first type know how to make the transformation from a revolutionary or terrorist leader to a statesman. And this is how the world looks at them. The other type are the Castros. And you know, right after 9/11, I happened to visit with Javier Solana, who was at that time with the European Union. Earlier, he was with NATO. And he asked me, can you explain why doesn't Arafat behave like Musharraf in Pakistan? Musharraf knew how to make the switch, knowing that the opportunity beckons. Arafat still remained until his death the leader of a terrorist organization, could not make the transformation. So maybe if Jolani...
in spite of the Oslo Accords.
Yes, of course. It was in his nature. And maybe Jolani can make the switch, and 5 years from now, they'll accept him in the world capitals.
Well, I genuinely hope they won't, even though in today's day and age, we're seeing people that look and sound like him roaming the streets of Europe and the United States. So who knows? But let's divert our attention right now, since we're going to discuss matters related to Syria at length later today, of course, during our Jerusalem studio panel. Ansar Allah, the Houthis, an Iranian proxy that wants still to be very vigorously involved in attacking Israel, launching an unmanned aerial vehicle, striking a high-rise residential building in Yavne, the central city of Yavne, all the while also continuing to abrupt and thwart freedom of navigation in the strategic strait of the Bab el-Mandeb, including the adjacent waterways. What can you tell us about the current?
So it's very interesting to see that the most threatening arms that they have, the ballistic missiles, cannot cause a lot of damage to Israel because they are intercepted by the sophisticated Israeli systems. The least threatening system, the drone, is causing such a damage. It's mostly a terror weapon, even though, as we saw, even 5 kilos of explosive can cause a damage to an apartment or an apartment building, and sometimes even more. And this is the second time when such a drone has caused a lot of damage without being either detected or intercepted. Now, the Israeli Air Force has been focusing on Syria and on Lebanon, but there will come a time when these fronts can be swept under the rug, and Israel will take on the Houthis.
General Sofrin, the last time such an unmanned aerial vehicle struck, last time Tel Aviv, and brought about, unfortunately, a casualty in the city. Israel abruptly destroyed much of the Hodeidah port. Would we expect, or could we expect something similar to happen now?
I'm not sure that you can compare between these two cases because the circumstances are different. If you look right now, Israel is focused right now on striking Syria and trying to demolish all what we call the strategic assets, and there are still some that are being left. And this is the main focus, and this is the main priority right now. Second, the Air Force is still continue to support the troops in Gaza and the activities in Gaza, mainly on the northern part of Gaza, and they participate fully in this fighting. The third issue is to be able to react in Lebanon if needed. And in order to hit one more time some facility in Yemen under the Houthis regime, means that you have to send many airplanes, many aircrafts, and what we call tankers and others as well, which is a huge amount of aircrafts. And let's see, if I don't believe that only one strike will be sufficient, because I believe that if you have to go and hit the Houthis, you have to strike them so bad that they will consider in the future one more time if they're going to attack Israel or not. And to hit some place and to go back will not be sufficient, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. Owen, let's take one step further since we don't have very much time left. Nevertheless, the Iranians installed many cascades, the RR6 and so on, being able to bolster their enrichment of uranium of up to 60% purity quite significantly. The International Atomic Energy Agency, at least the Secretary General, is expected to publish a report tomorrow with regard to a request that he leveled towards the Iranians about increasing or bolstering the inspections of the agency of those new cascades. The Iranians are expected, according to what I'm told, to say yes to a limited arrangement. Is this just another ploy by the Islamic regime in Tehran to try and convince the Trump administration that they're prepared to negotiate their nuclear program?
The facts are not in dispute. The question is, what is the filter through which these facts are being seen by the supreme leaders and his small circle of advisors? Because if he looks at these facts the way presumably we do, then he will know that following what the Israeli Air Force has done to Syria, earlier to Hezbollah, and twice to Iran itself in April and then in October, it is not wise for him to provoke Israel, especially with Trump either about to take office or after January 20th. So this is what we would have done rationally. But who knows how his mind works? Up to now, he has been cautious not to cross the line. But we cannot judge it in a linear fashion, that what happened yesterday and today will also happen tomorrow. Maybe General Sofrin, Dr. Sofrin, who is an expert on it, can offer some insight.
Absolutely. Dr. Sofrin?
If you look at what the Iranians are aiming, they are now in a great dilemma. Some people, mainly the revolutionary Guards, are pushing and trying to apply pressure on the leader, on Khamenei, to rush and advance what we call to a nuclear weapon. Now, the fact is that they have more advanced centrifuge and so on is not sufficient, because once you have the material, the raw material, it will take at least a year and a half to complete what we call the atomic device, and then to be able to mount it on a missile, on a ballistic missile, that can be launched to probably let's say, for example, to Israel. Now, the second issue is that it's first of all against his belief, because he so far didn't allow them to go furthermore, but just to enrich to the level of 60% and no more than that. But they, of course, can control and get to 90% easily and smoothly. This is no obstacle on the way. And the second issue is to take into consideration that on January 20, Mr. Trump is going to get back to the White House, and he's going to imply what he calls maximum pressure on Iran. And if Iran will try to break through from what we call the NPT and to begin rushing towards producing an atomic device, they're going to be suffering a great heat coming out from the United States, from the UN, and I'm not sure that they want to take the risk right now, knowing that they are vulnerable. They don't have anti-aircraft batteries. They don't have this protection. They are vulnerable. The skies are open to any attack, and they have to take it into consideration. And I believe that being more pragmatic, Mr. Khamenei will not go and rush right now into an atomic device.
And they don't have Hezbollah to distract Israel.
Of course. Well,
Of course not.
Brigadier General in Reserve, Dr. Amnon Sofrin, Mr. Amir Oren, I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. And until our next update, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.